Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am just going to say thank you for coming to Metro's office this afternoon. I want to thank Congresswoman Pressley for hosting this roundtable regarding issues that are so important to the folks that all of us serve, and thank all of our partners that are here from the City of Boston, from the State House, and all of the partner organizations that we work with so closely for so long. And with that, I know we are already running behind, so I will turn it over to Congresswoman.
Okay, all right. Good to be with everyone. I'm just coming from an event in Randolph, which was an incredible demonstration and reminder of what is possible when we take care of our neighbors and when we come together on the city, state, and federal level. And so even though I know it is easy to sit in a deficit mindset at a time of unprecedented challenge, I do think it is important that we remain resolved in what is so incredible about this Commonwealth and what is possible when we do come together in defense of our neighbors, our communities, and to advance progress. These days it's hard because we feel like we're doing a lot more harm mitigation than we are upliftment and advancement. But I am, still maintain hope and a spirit of optimism, indomitable, as it were, because of each and every one of you, and because of the people and the communities that we serve. And honestly, because I just followed this one, Annie Russo, into any room, any fight, any foxhole, any table. I'm so grateful for you, Annie, and thank you for the opportunity to convene today, and thank you all for doing it on such short notice. As you know, the schedule in Washington is unpredictable, so I appreciate your very much joining us. I know the stakes are high, the needs are certainly urgent, and the work each of you do every day is nothing short of essential. So please know that your labor is valued. Thank you for your assurance to keep our neighbors safely housed. Your work is essential to this effort and to this moment. We're all here because we believe that housing is a human right. It is also dignity. It is also economic security. Safe, stable, and affordable housing is the foundation of health, economic mobility, and opportunity. But right now, that right is being severely undermined. And I would say with HUD in particular, it began with from the very beginning of these so-called Department of Government efficiency cuts, an administration that defines efficiency by making people hungrier, poorer, sicker, and less safe, beginning with the hollowing out of housing and urban development. And so this is continuing with the HUD funding cuts to continuum of care. And the delays in Section 8 payments are placing a tremendous strain on service providers, tenants, and of course, housing authorities. And again, I know you all know this here. So, as I say so often, why do we preach to the choir? Because we need the choir to sing. We need to make sure that people do not, it's in the overwhelm of it all, in this coordinated, unrelenting assault at every level. There are things that people are missing. So we want to make sure that people are aware. Families are being destabilized, shelters are over capacity, and far too many people are left unsure of how they will keep a roof over their heads. In Massachusetts, we have nearly 4,000 people who may become homeless again because of these changes. 4,000. These are people who are already in a home, getting on their feet, getting the health care and wraparound supports they need. We know we have an affordability crisis in this state and in this nation. And now is not the time to make that worse and push a stable home even further out of reach for many, including our elderly. We've all been reading about and seeing up close and personal this growing great wave of elders who are vulnerable to being unhoused or who are joining our homeless community. We know the Housing First model works, and we know that every person, child, and grandparent needs a home. And so that's why just last week, you may have seen my question line. I serve on the Financial Services Committee. I was demanding the Department of HUD fully fund the Continuum of Care program and reverse the harmful policy changes the Trump administration is attempting to make to this program. And again, in the overwhelm of it, they mean for you to think that these proposals are inevitable. But it's so important that we resist, reject, condemn at every turn. So I've convened this roundtable because, you know, I practice the ethos that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And so each of you is on the front line of this crisis. You are supporting tenants and families and residents who are navigating impossible barriers. You are keeping shelters open. You are keeping people housed and helping them maintain safety and dignity in a moment of deep uncertainty. Your expertise, your experience, and recommendations are essential in shaping a path forward. And so I'm grateful for your leadership. I'm grateful for your partnership as we work together to protect our neighbors and to strengthen the continuum of care. And so now we'll just get into the conversation. Doug, are we live streaming? Okay, very good. And I know we have some press joining us later. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that for the purposes of your communications and how you project, and because the public is engaged. So I just want to know how these, whoever would like to weigh in here, but some of my guiding questions are just about the funding cuts and Section 8 delays and how this is affecting the people that you serve right now. How are these changes impacting your organization's ability to provide services? And are there specific programs that you want to name that are vulnerable to, you know, an undermined staffing capacity? So just some of my questions top of mind, but honestly, free flowing, we'll take the conversation wherever folks want to take it. I just want to hear directly from you so that I can enumerate and amplify what I'm hearing from you, both to Ranking Member Waters and in our advocacy to the administration.
I can start.
Okay.
Diane Cohen, I'm with the Somerville Housing Authority, and it's creating so much angst unnecessarily. So there's enough going on with the other than, you know, with the shutdown and the funding cuts, you know, the changes in immigration and how that might be affecting families who have, you know, don't have legal status here, or the requirement to work, and some other things that are just creating a lot of anxiety for our families. But not being able to be sure that we could pay landlords the housing assistance payments that finally I was funded on Friday around 3 o'clock in the 6th round of the shortfall funds. We got about $1.1 million so that we could pay landlords. Now, we did have some funding. We were able to borrow from some of our other revenue, we had some additional revenue that we could pay for the Section 8 landlords for the month of December, but I couldn't have done that. There was nothing, you know, to borrow again for January. So very stressful times. Staff are overworked because the phones are ringing off the hook, whether it's landlords, tenants, what's going to happen to my family, or families who are on waiting lists who thought they were going to be offered a unit and now are waiting. So the stress level already was high, and now it's even much more so. Somerville's a sanctuary city, so we have a large immigration population, and that's, you know, another whole situation in itself. We have a preference for homeless families, and so those are the priorities. Those are the folks who, you know, get first served in our program. And that's been a huge blow, knowing that what's happening with the continuum of care, permanent supportive housing. The Somerville Housing Authority doesn't run those programs, but the community has families that are, you know, being served by those funds. So this has been, you know, a nightmare, really, through this administration. There's no other way to say it. And people are exhausted, and it's really hard to try to keep everyone's spirits. You talk about uplifting, and it's very hard to do that, you know, internally and externally. You know, staff, you know, is my job safe? Are you going to be able to make payroll? How are we going to, you know, they saw what happened to HUD, all of our colleagues at HUD, those that were still there, those that were deemed, you know, essential and had to go to work and not get paid for a period of time, and now are being asked to come back and, you know, are finally getting paid. But it's been extremely trying times. Tell you that, I know you know that, but it's just been hard to try to keep that, you know, reserve.
Sure. Diane, I know you're being at the Somerville Housing Authority. Our offices work closely together on a lot of constituent casework referrals, you know, and the like. And so I'm so grateful for you, and I thank you just for naming not only the people in the communities that we serve, but the people that do the work, who are under tremendous stress and strain. And we know that morale has definitely been compromised. And so we have been, as much as possible, calling into staff meetings and things like that, just to encourage people and to remind them that their work is essential and that we see them too. And of course, the people who serve these people in communities and do this work, laboring in love, are not exempt from this hardship either. So people that are doing the work are also being impacted by the hostilities of this administration and the threats to housing affordability and the like. So I thank you for naming that. Yeah. Would anyone else like to speak to staffing issues, payroll concerns, uncertainty? Yes. Did you want to go? Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. I can.
Okay, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
Shayla Simmons, Cambridge Housing Authority. I would also echo those same concerns. But what I wanted to also elevate is the interactivity between federal funding and state funding, because they are related. And while CEOC doesn't necessarily directly impact our permanent supportive housing programs, we get our funding from MHSA. And, when they have to focus on spreading their non-federal dollars further, that has a trickle-down effect on the people that we serve. So I think that, while we often focus on the direct dollar amount or lack thereof from the federal government, it's also important to consider how the loss of those funds impact the state and then the cities. We are fortunate in Cambridge to have a city who has stepped up to assist us in funding different programs so that we can continue to serve our populations. But when we decide not to fight against and not push back against, I should say, the changes that are being made to COC funding, it has a detrimental impact on the state and the city and on the residents and on the staff. So yes, it is exhausting, but it behooves us to push back in every opportunity that we possibly can, because there's so much at stake. With permanent supportive housing particularly, you're talking about people who are coming out of shelters, who need wraparound services, who want to be successful in housing, but just need a little extra help and support. We know that there is an affordability crisis. That's, everybody knows that. But it's that there is an overflow in shelters. And because there's an overflow in shelters, there's an overflow in permanent supportive housing. And because there's an overflow in permanent supportive housing, there's an overflow in public housing. People can't leave public housing to go into the regular rental market because that's too expensive. And people in the regular rental market can't afford to buy a house. So there's this trickle down effect that way as well. So I would just say that every opportunity that we have to be able to push back, to be able to advocate, to be able to say, this isn't right, you can do better, we're going to take that opportunity. And so I thank you for pulling this group together just so that we can elevate the interconnectivity of all the funding streams. So when there's attack on one, it's inevitably an attack on all of them.
Very well put. Yeah, thank you for showing how both the funding streams are all interconnected, but also, Diane, I appreciate your speaking to that the issues are not happening in silos either. So you're serving people in communities that are also being impacted by, the rogue actions of ICE and the threat of the integrity of their families remaining whole and their safety. So it's all interconnected. It's all layered. And you're right. That's exactly why we're here today, because we don't want to move as if these things are inevitabilities. We have to fight back at every turn. So thank you for the fight you're taking on every day and for being here. I wonder, for the next couple of people speaking, can you, just for the purposes of the live stream and when we speak to the press later today, can anyone speak to scale? Because I think, we're talking vaguely, but if anyone could speak to scale, in other words, normally we would have this amount of money for landlords, but now it's this. So that means if you have a tenant who would have been getting this much, now it's this much. The state normally is getting this, but now because of the, so if we could just try to be more granular and specific so that people understand the scale of what we're talking about in terms of the drop off here. So, and everyone, if you'll just say, again, your name and your affiliation. Thank you so much.
So as you noted, there's 4,000 households across Massachusetts who are in supportive housing. It is supported by the every
Mhm.
year. 91 million of that is going towards supportive housing and largely programs. This is a very COC. People don't always know what that is. First, this is just like rental assistance. Those individuals and families, by definition, all have disabilities. What we're talking about here is 1,000 households with disabilities. And others will be able to tell you, shelters are already full. There's unsheltered homelessness rising in communities, rural, our gateway cities. And what HUD is doing with this notice of opportunity is a 180 on all of the criteria. HUD is penalizing providers who did exactly what HUD asked them to do last year. Prioritize racial equity, prioritize housing first, prioritize all those solutions that works. So Massachusetts and other communities across the nation who have done exactly what HUD wanted us to do past decade are now being penalized for that, and then what's at stake.
Thank you.
Lydia
Hey,
Downey,
Lindy.
High Street again.
Mhm.
Thank you very much for this woman. It's 170,000 people across the country. It's not just here in Massachusetts. There isn't a state that doesn't have this money. It has the continuum of care money through HUD has been directed only for long-time homeless people, not the people who need a little bit of help, a couple of months worth of help, not even the people who need first and last month's rent. This is a group that has disabilities. They tend to skew much older than even our general homeless population. A lot of elders. For us, it is folks who will not get out of homelessness on their own, and if they lose this housing, they don't have another option except the streets or shelter. Right now, 90% of Boston's dollars, of which we are a part of, go into housing. HUD is saying now only 30%. That's a 60% cut
Mhm.
to people who don't have other options. Much of the dollars we get from this go to private landlords. They're all small landlords. They're in Dorchester and Mattapan and Jamaica Plain. This is really, for many of these landlords, we're really grateful that work with us. But if we lose these dollars, these landlords are not going to be convinced that we can continue to work with them. And we're really grateful to them for stepping up and working with us on leasing up units. So it's not at all a small shift. And part of the strategy with this, what HUD has done in the past, what Caitlin said, is getting people who are in shelter for a long time out of shelter frees up capacity for people who become newly homeless. Even if they're only homeless for a couple of weeks, it ensures we will have a bed for them in the worst case scenario. If we stop this, shelters will be completely overwhelmed and people will end up on the street. Even now, I looked at our numbers from last month, last year, this month, this year. We're seeing 100 more people. Interestingly enough, a bit of a higher percentage among women. So there's no upside to this, and there's room for transitional programs. I believe that, but this is not the way to get there.
Okay, so far, I was saying to my staff the other day that, again, the shift that mindset from deficit to asset, we're no longer saying our most vulnerable communities, we're saying our most resilient. Some of our most resilient communities that we've named here today, the disabled, the elderly, you're naming a growing constituency of unhoused women. I know this is also true for the LGBTQ community, which is why we fought so hard for the Pride. Yes, if folks can just be as specific as possible about the impacts of these cuts in funding and what it means for real people's lives and, for the programs that you administer and for the staff that provide them. Yes.
Chris Norris from Metro Housing Boston, specifically for continuum of care. In Metro, when you walked up through the lobby and saw families in the lobby as you came up, we serve 600 families with continuum of care grants. That's $15 million going out into the community to stabilize families, to provide for landlords to maintain their small businesses. The city will only have $12 million across the entire city, not just Metro's contract, if what HUD has proposed goes into effect. So I think that's sort of the first thing as we talk about COC. But I'd like to say a little about a broader issue, and that is in Massachusetts, we know how to do this, and we know that housing solves homelessness. We had a state voucher program before the federal Section 8 program. We had residential assistance for families in transition before the federal emergency rental assistance program. Currently, we have a deficit of 183,000 homes for households that have extremely low incomes. We only have one home for every 2 families that need it. In the meantime, both the Section 8 program at the state level and the state voucher program on the mobile side are closed. We are losing vouchers every single month because of the lack of funding to support them.
What was the statistic that you offered there in terms of you only have how many units of housing for?
We have a deficit of 183,000 homes for households with extremely low incomes, and currently we have one home for every 2 households that have extremely low income. And it's actually gotten worse over the last number of years, not better.
Really devastating. Senator?
As I'm not a direct person who's in the many of my colleagues and friends here, I'm not a direct service provider. The impact of these federal cuts do obviously impact us as state legislators, and because when the federal government or Trump administration.
Thank you. I'm gonna need you to be precise. I'm gonna need you to be precise. Republican majority. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
When the Trump administration chooses to cut cruelly on the most vulnerable populations who have the most to lose, the immediate response is they're going to look to localities. They're going to look to state budgets. They're going to look to the city coffers and say, well, what's there? And, we've responded in some cases with some policy. We did a federal worker service member eviction moratorium. We did that for many of the folks who were just told they had to work, but they weren't getting paid. And so it's forced us to be creative and nimble in a way. But at the same time, many people, we were looking at the rainy day funds. I was looking at the rainy day funds for SNAP. But the problem with this kind of cutting is there no rhyme, reason, date, or predictability. And so when you want to go into the rainy day funds, you don't want to keep going back. You want to say it's going to be this amount of money that we need. And it's very hard to reach into your emergency funds when you have no idea, oh, it just stopped. It started again. Here comes another emergency. They're going to do this. So I wanted to say that that's where a lot of our headspace has been. Being nimble in policy, and I look to all of them, not only here, but throughout my district, here in Winthrop, to help us be as nimble as possible when it comes to that. But I think there's also some, it's not popular to say, but we need to look at our tax base and how we're raising money to not just raise money for money's sake, but to Trump-proof our economy. Honestly, but for the millionaire's tax, right? There was a grassroots movement in Massachusetts that is looked to by the entire nation as, look what they did over there. That is a 4% tax, as you know, on millionaires that has produced over $1 billion over budget for transportation and for education, right? Yeah. Those two. And as a result, we're able to have universal school meals. We're able to have, free community college. We're doing this all with these kinds of cuts. And we're looking at how we can still expand income minimums. So it brings us back to the conversation we left off with, and we'll continue to talk about the transfer fee, for example, and looking at the deed excise tax, and really having a housing for housing tax structure so that we have perpetual funding coming in that is regenerative based on if housing is doing well and expensive, which it is, as much as you may not hear that from a lot of our corporate colleagues, our corporate interests, you may hear that it's, they're having a very tough time, nowhere near as tough as who we are serving. And so there has to be a real talk at the State House, as unpopular as it may be, but as necessary as it is, if you truly want to have a buffer zone for these willy-nilly kind of cuts, that we as state and local entities have
to look at how we're raising tax, or at least augmenting our rainy day funds for what we believe and say is a human right in housing. So, and then there's the final component, Congresswoman. It is about, as you mentioned, the impact. We work so hard, and we'll be working together, by the way, the Congressman and I, on soul food and sealing, December 13th, sealing eviction records. But evictions, I mean, we can all see this is going to, the eviction filings will go up. The people will not have their rent. People will file immediately. So now we're looking at another way in which our legal system is going to chew up, create records that they have that are, they're going to have to turn around and hopefully seal one day. And so it's another thing for someone who is already just trying to get back to base level. Now they're going to have an eviction record. Their Section 8 is going to be cut in half or delayed. And now we have this entire new system in which we're going to have to put this family, this person through already. And so that is what I'm also concerned about, is the amount of evictions that are going to be filed and how we're going to deal with that for legal services. And again, back to you guys as well.
Yeah. Well, we're advocating for the continuum of care, but we're also talking about sort of a continuity of harm, that will be compounded, if these changes go into effect. And I love where you were going, Senator, because actually that had been one of my questions. As you all know, I've repeatedly said that this moment, I liken it, the closest analog is the pandemic, because it was just wholesale harm. And even though we knew anecdotally what communities would experience that harm, the brunt of it, that harm was indiscriminate. This harm is very discriminate, very precise, very cruel. But similarly, during the pandemic, we did innovate. We were nimble. There were policies that were advanced, budgetary investments that were made that people have been saying for decades we could not do. My only frustration is just that when the pandemic was behind us, we defaulted to that unjust status quo, despite what had been laid bare. It's not true across the board, but it's true in many instances. So that had actually been my question, which is, what are those things we need to be looking at in terms of increased funding or permanent funding that is not going to be subject to technical assistance or appropriation changes? Like, that is really what we do need to be thinking about. Like how you said, Trump proof. Like, how do we inoculate ourselves? And it's also because it's not just about how do we sojourn through and survive the next 4 years. We do need to be thinking beyond that, because we're going to have to restore and rebuild and reimagine when we do get to the other side of this, because of what has been dismantled and degraded. So I appreciate your thought leadership there, Senator, very much. Yes.
Dan Lesser, City of Boston. Just wanted to get some more color on the continuum of care in Boston.
Thank you.
Chris and Lydia were talking about, where we have about a $48 million grant. As Chris mentioned, we can only spend up to 30% on permanent housing. Right now, we're spending $44 million on permanent housing, so we have to go down to $13 million for permanent housing. And right now, we're housing about 1,600 people through that, and we'll have to go down to 30% of that. And so we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people who are who are in permanent supportive housing. So they're formerly homeless with a disability, we will have to figure out how to transition them to another housing opportunity. And we all know that there isn't permanent supportive housing out there beyond this. We're in a rental market that's extremely high priced. And so we're extremely concerned about this. We've joined with other cities for a lawsuit, and we're working with all of our providers to try to be as creative as possible to take on this moment. And we know that there's going to be significant harm as part of this. And so we so appreciate, Congresswoman, your advocacy at the federal level around the THUD bill, and just trying to see, is there a way out to at least extend for another year to keep people in homes, to allow more planning, to have a better way to kind of keep people stably housed. And as Lindy knows really well, the shelters in the city of Boston are already over capacity. I checked the census from last night, and we're 100 beds over capacity already, and we're not even. It's pretty cold.
It's like 6 degrees. Yeah.
And imagine adding 800 formerly homeless people with disabilities who are in permanent supported housing into that, and we obviously open emergency shelters and try to meet the moment, but it's a big challenge. Katie, do you want to?
Yeah, thank you,
Dan.
Dan.
I'll add, I'm Katie Cahill, also with the Mayor's Office of Housing. I'm the Director of Supportive Housing. So we organize the continuance application on behalf of the Boston COC. So Metro, Pine Street, Mahasa, all of our partners, we work with them to put forth a really competitive application. So this year, HUD has really flipped the application on its head, as you've heard. So 30% of the application, you're capped at that for permanent housing. And that means all forms of permanent housing, not just PSH, but it's our rapid program, it's our joint transitional and rapid rehousing programs. But the real cruelty of this application is that if we are defunded for 70% of our permanent housing programs, the vast majority of the clients that are in those programs will not be eligible for the new component types that we can apply for. So for instance, somebody that loses their PSH slot is not going to be eligible to go into a transitional housing unit because they are coming from a house location. So we are doing these gymnastics in our head of, okay, do we make somebody homeless for a day to get
Wow.
them? So it really, it's not just the severity of the cut, it's the way they want the system to shift. And it's not, sort of proven by research. We know that transitional housing is the most expensive intervention for housing, which is why HUD moved away from it, because PSH, you're saving money and you're housing people. So again, it's not just the cuts, it's also like the redesign that they want us to do. And then I just want to speak to something that both my colleagues from PHAs talked about, and it's just the really fragile ecosystem of housing. So oftentimes COCs are working in conjunction with PHAs to try to leverage resources through PHAs. So we have preferences, et cetera. Well, there's no safe harbor anymore because PHAs are not being funded. So when we're looking at people getting displaced from PSH, we can't look at the PHA. Like we're looking at what's happening on the EHVs, which didn't get extended. And we had COC clients that were expecting to stay there that are going to return to homelessness, and also move on clients that we had leveraged PHA resources for, but now we can't get at those because they have to make up the shortfall in EHV. So it's all really interconnected, but base bottom line, very, very harmful and just is not going to work.
Yeah. And I was saying to speak to scale. So let me just provide some from my vantage point in serving on the Financial Services Committee. When Maxine Waters was the chair of the Financial Services Committee, we had maybe 40 hearings on affordable housing. When we transitioned to a Republican majority and they got the gavel, we had one hearing on affordable housing for the entire legislative session. So I just want to give you just show you the scale from my end. And now, as we are in the final throes of the NDAA on the Senate side, Senator Warren, Senator Scott, working in a bipartisan fashion on the road to housing, which is very comprehensive. And I think remedies some of what we fought for in the Build Back Better bill, but that died, so we didn't get that. But what is partisan about housing, right? This is a rural issue, a suburban issue, an urban issue. It is dignity, it is health, it is mobility. What are we even debating? But the chair of Financial Services, Congressman Hill, so far has been more interested in monetary policy than housing. And so that's been a tension in these negotiations, but we are still fighting, and pushing. So I'm hopeful that although it might not address the acute urgency of this, it will get to some of those broader issues in program reforms and growing our housing stock and all of those things. I did just want to name that. Okay.
Just getting back to something that Dan mentioned, given all of the challenges on reaching anything that's bipartisan in Congress right now, I think time is the thing that folks might be able to come to agreement on. And I say that because, and I think we may be the first, but the first 300 families on Boston's Continuum of Care grant lose their funding at the end of March. We have
Yeah.
2.5, 3 months
Yeah,
max
that's our letter.
before, and it'll be less because we have to send the notices out before that to scare everyone and tell them they're going to lose their housing. So if there is a way, while we discuss funding and while we discuss program rules and while we discuss everything else, the intricacies, to buy time, that will be a success for now.
And I think and we shouldn't hear back from HUD in response to the NOFO until May 1st.
Right.
So we're not going to even know if we were given the funding until a month after the funding has expired.
And they're saying the period of performance for COC 25 grants starts on May 1st. So we don't even know that we'll be able to retro back for grants that have expired prior to that. It's not usual.
Yeah. So that was the basis of there have been, I know people here report it all the time, and they sent a letter, and people are like, what does that have to do with anything? You know, what is a strongly worded letter? So what? But I do believe in the power of the pen, not only as a lawmaker, but in your letterhead, because it is about putting people on notice, and it is, making the public aware, as well about these things. And so there were several, letters in that regard. So there was one letter on Continuum of Care to defend it against the administration's rollbacks. That was with Appropriations Ranking Member Rosa DeLauro and also Jim Clyburn, requesting that HUD would provide, a list of all COC grants that will expire between December 2025 and 26. And then we wanted to know the number of staff assigned to review applications and then the expected dates for executing those agreements. And that includes the timing of when those FY25 grantees would begin distributing funds. So that was one, overture of advocacy and outreach. Then the other was a letter led by Ranking Member Waters and FSC Democrats. We had about 50 sign-ons, and that was urging HUD to rescind the policy changes on permanent housing and grantee eligibility, fully fund the permanent housing program, that's where we stand. I mean, there's more that I could get into, but I just wanted to make you aware, since we were talking about timing, that was central to the questions that we were posing. Which also I wanted to ask you all about, because I chair the House Reproductive Freedom Caucus, and I remember in one of our marching or mobilization or agitation actions, and I said, everyone here is going to be okay. I'm worried about, the people that are not marching, that are not protesting, that are not, the ones who stand to be the most impacted. And that's what I worry about in this as well, that those that stand to be the most harmed by this don't know what's coming or could come. And it's a balance, right? Because we also don't want to alarm people. So could you just speak a little bit about how are you actually engaging?
So, one thing I do want to say that resonates really strongly for me. So we have a consumer advisory council, our back home council, people with lived experience, and this has come up quite a bit. Like, they are tuned in to what is going on, but they're tuned in and they still aren't 100% sure, was it my program that's impacted? Understanding the differences between programs. So I think there's just this kind of sense of dread. They're not 100% sure if they're in COC. Maybe they're in something with the PHA.
Can I give an example to that? People on Mass Health did not understand that you're impacted by a Medicaid cut.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the closest example that I can give.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
So, we're starting to think, as a continuum, how do we communicate this threat without freaking out staff, freaking out tenants, but letting them know that, they need to agitate. And just really be in the advocacy space to the extent that they can. But I do think there's a lot of fear and a lot of confusion, and they know something bad's probably going to happen, but they're not sure if it impacts them.
Can I add what I think might be also a complicating factor is communication coming from HUD.
Right.
It's often that we are also not sure what's going to happen next, or when we can expect to get a decision, or who we should call or harass. So I think that is another sort of complicating factor to how we then communicate with our residents and our participants and our staff. And so we have to kind of walk this fine line.
Because if there were norms,
Right.
there'd be a policy proposal. We'd have someone to talk to that would give us guidance on the implementation, and then we would take that out.
Correct.
But there's no norms.
There are no norms. We have to sort of rely on getting information in non-traditional ways. Like we have to now be on X to see what has been tweeted. But we do, I think, rely really heavily on our industry partners as well, who have connections in DC, NARO, for example, and some of the CLAPAs and the FADAs, these larger industry organizations who can then sort of whisper to us, like, well, we heard that you might have funding through the end of January or through the end
We heard.
We heard. And so we then take that and craft a message that we send out to our staff. We believe that we have funding until the end of January. These are the steps that we will take if we don't have more certain information by the end of December. And I think that we couch all of our communications in this sort of like if, then, because we don't want to be alarmist, but we also want people to have information. We don't want them to be blindsided. We wanted our staff to know that there was a possibility that if the shutdown didn't end by a certain date, we would have to start making some staffing changes. And you don't want to wait until the week before to let your staff know that. It doesn't give them time to plan. So I think to answer your question about how we are communicating, we really have been trying to walk this fine line between enough information so that people can make decisions, but not so much information that people are alarmed because we're not certain of the information that we're giving out. We've done this in a variety of ways. We put banners on our website. We've sent, particularly related to the mixed status families, we sent directed mailings to those families that said, here's what we know, here's how that might impact you, here are some deadlines that you should be aware of. And then all we can do is field calls as they come in, answer questions to the best of our abilities, and try to keep people calm.
Well, as I said, we work closely with so many of you on constituent casework and services. But please also do recognize, because we do have a big platform, that see our platform as your platform as well. And if there are PSAs or education things that it would be helpful for us to steward our platforms to help to get the word out as we know more, please do keep us in mind. Bearing that in mind, is there anything else that folks would like to offer that is instructional? Would any of you like to give a TED talk on why housing first policies work? I'd like to take that back to my colleagues across the aisle. So far I have not been able to compel them. Yes.
Is that it always was about housing.
Right.
Until now.
Yeah.
Our founding executive director went to work for the Bush administration to bring housing first.
Wow.
So really, it's only now, and when we talk to our national partners, we hear that there are a lot of Republicans. But the atmosphere of fear, I think, both in DC and the fear the providers are experiencing. Statewide organizations, they're talking to providers who are weighing and possibly, do I speak out and then make a target back, which risks staff, which risks housing? Do I not speak out and then let this happen? So the level of conversation, I haven't lived through anything like this. That fear, and so I think that's why we are, and to everyone who can speak out, for all the folks who
I also want to say I think there's a lot of denial. Denial is a very strong emotion. And we have a lot of families who just don't believe that it could happen, that they could lose their housing, or they could be made to have to go to work, or they could, so we could try to educate and communicate and do all we want. They're not going to read the letter, listen to the robocall, come to the meeting. We try to organize, and I feel like they feel under attack. they don't want to leave their homes because maybe ICE is in Medford or they're coming down the Mystics or they're going to come down, there's a raid or something might be happening. Are they going to be losing their benefits or SNAP or now Section 8 housing and pay? I just feel like everywhere they turn, they feel they're under attack. And oftentimes we're seeing. So it's mind-boggling because we expected there'd be a bigger backlash of anger and let's fight this and that, and some people just putting their head in the sand and just just that overwhelming.
Yes.
I agree with Caitlin as well, and I would say two items that we hear a lot about are health and work or jobs. This change will make people less healthy because folks with stable housing are generally healthier than folks who are homeless, and it will cause people to lose their jobs because it's far easier to keep and maintain a job when you're housed than when you're homeless. So for those folks on the other side of the aisle who want to push healthcare or health or jobs, this cuts in exactly the opposite direction of what they claim they want.
Part of the reason this has had bipartisan support is that there are so many studies that I don't even think we can count them anymore. Across the entire country in Canada, that really looks at the savings of healthcare. When people who have been homeless for the long term get housed, they stop going to the emergency room, they don't end up inpatient, they can go back to work, they become stable, they get primary care. And everybody has recognized that there's a set of data behind this program. And it's been really very bipartisan, just like the tax credit, the low-income housing tax credit program. Bipartisan on both sides of the aisle because it hits housing. And there isn't a state in the country anymore where housing isn't an issue. Maybe worse here in Massachusetts, but the entire country is struggling with housing. So it's a shift away from really a data-driven set of interventions that recognizes healthcare as a beneficiary of housing and support.
Yes.
That's so much of the narrative. What we also need to do, those of us who know that housing is we also need to still counter the very racist, the very classist,
Tropes. Yes.
About who is on Section 8, about who is deserving of housing, and who is truly being helped by a lot of these vouchers. Too much of that is coming from the president talking about undocumented folks who are all taking up all these resources. It's just not true, but it's also cool. So this is who you're going to blame this on when the resources are there. We can all see. You just choose not to release them. That's number one. The other component is really reminding people that vouchers are for veterans. That is a form of Section 8. There are a lot of, the New England Home Shelter for veterans. They are all dependent on this funding as well. So maybe for the other people, for the folks across the aisle, if they don't care about anybody else, they do claim to care about veterans and those who serve the claim.
I'm trying to say they were denying them SNAP too. So
they did, But I do think it's important for us to say this is the continuum of community that is all impacted by Section 8. Of course it's moms, of course it's parents, of course it's children, of course it's seniors, it's also veterans, it's people with disabilities. It's all of this. It's reflected in the diversity in our communities. So I think that's something very important for me as a policymaker as well when I talk about this, but I think it's really important for us to really put those tropes to bed the best way we can.
I agree. That's another thing that we should not just accept. It's just, we have to not normalize. What happens is that we're sort of getting, I don't know if you all know this, but at one point they had established an anti-woke caucus in Congress, which to me really was just a caucus that was an emboldened anti-blackness. It was, if I'm being frank, but they do want us to be asleep and sort of lulled into a complacency where we do not vigorously condemn every time something anti-immigrant, anti-black, anti-trans, contempt for the poor, whatever is said, because we just say, oh, it's just Trump being Trump. And so then that becomes normalized. So I agree with you, Senator. We do have to vigorously condemn and call out every time these tropes are being perpetuated, but also continue to lift up the data, because whether you're talking about, SNAP or other things that we would consider, essential supports, many of the states represented by my colleagues across the aisle have a higher representation. The ACA subsidies, we'll have a vote this week on that. And all we need are 4 people from across the aisle to say, let's keep healthcare affordable, because the wealth of our nation is the health of our people. And people are going to go without. We just need 4. Just 4 people of conscience to sign that discharge petition to extend those ACA subsidies. But again, when you look at the math, the states represented by our Republican colleagues have some of the highest numbers of people who benefit from these lowered subsidies. I do want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilor-elect Culpepper, who served at HUD for decades, and we're so grateful for your expertise, especially for such a time as this, given the housing crisis. So the floor is yours if there are any comments you'd like to make, Counselor.
Thank you, Congresswoman. See my senator sitting over there. It's good to be here, especially when you're talking about housing, trying to find housing. I just had a issue with finding metro housing. And I've been here all my life.
Annie, where's the bat light? The Batman, yeah.
1400 was downtown Tremont Street.
Wow.
So I'm driving down, rushing to the meeting downtown. And it dawned on me when I got to 627 Tremont, I was going in the wrong direction.
Okay. I'm only letting you tell this story because media isn't here, because that's not a great story. So, but, oh, thank you.
So I turned around, I came down Tremont, the numbers are getting higher, I'm doing pretty good. Straight down Tremont, I forgot it turned into Columbus Avenue. So I'm looking at Columbus Avenue for 1411. The numbers started going down again. Then it dawned on me, Tremont Street, you got to take a right.
Well, we're glad you made it.
Yeah,
we're glad you made it and that you're here, Counselor.
No, I'm just here to listen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
What I've been telling everyone since the election is, I'm in a listening mode. I just want to listen to folks. Mm-hmm. So when I do get to the council, I'm at least informed about some of the issues that the folks are dealing with today. During the campaign, you heard me talk a lot. Every debate, every forum, you heard me talk. So it's time for me now to listen. And so I'm just going, we're doing a listening tour as soon as I get sworn in, whenever that is. I'm just listening, especially after being at HUD at 27 years. Did a lot of good stuff at HUD for a lot of folks, and put folks in homes. And when we did the demonstration disposition program, we turned Academy Homes over to the Tenant Association as the owners. Folks didn't understand what we were doing, but we did it so quietly. By the time they realized what we had done, it was too late for them to undo it. When we did Campfield Gardens in the South End, we demolished it, built Campfield Gardens, brand new, transferred ownership to the Tenant Association. Folks didn't realize what we were doing until we had done it. By the time they realized it, it was too late. When you look at Seaver Street, the apartments on Seaver Street from Maple to Humboldt Ave and down Humboldt, transferred ownership to the Tenant Association. The Tenant Association owns them. What we called that at the time was neighborhood stabilization, just trying to stabilize neighborhoods. But no one understood what we were doing. While we were doing it intentionally, folks just weren't paying attention. And now when you look back at Academy Homes, they don't ever have to worry about a developer coming in, raising the rent so high that they can't live there, can't build a estate. They don't ever have to worry about developer coming in, moving them out. It was neighborhood stabilization, and we took existing resources. Let me just conclude with this.
Yeah.
If you And I know you're saying, well, how did HUD get Academy Homes into their inventory? When the housing bust in 2008 and 2009-10 went crazy, developers were defaulting on multifamily housing developments. So they defaulted on Academy Homes, brought Academy Homes into our inventory. The issue was, what do we do with Academy Homes now? There was a group at HUD that said, well, let's put it back out to auction, let the developers bid on it again, give it back to the developers, the one that just defaulted. And then there was a group of us in HUD that said, no, give the tenants a chance. Let the tenants have a chance at ownership. They can't do any worse. The developers just defaulted on them. Henry Cisneros agreed with us. He went to Congress. Congress put together the demonstration disposition program, put the money in the program. Marvin Stiffinger applied for it. HUD was the only city in the country that got the demonstration disposition program because they filed the application. HUD approved it. They took all the money from all the other cities that didn't have the application. Boston was the only city that had a demonstration disposition program that transferred ownership to the tenant association. And so when Henry Cisneros said to us, look, we're going to side with the tenant association, let's give the tenants an opportunity, we did Boston real fast. And I had just come back, Ayanna, from Chief of Staff of Member of Congress. I had just come back to Boston. My mother had breast cancer. I had to leave Washington. I came home. They called me and said, we've pulled all the other demonstration disposition programs in the country. They called me, regional counsel. We want to pull this from Boston. I said, you can't. Because if you came to Boston and looked at Academy Homes, you see those grandmothers walking up 3 flights of stairs with their groceries. They don't have an elevator there. It was falling apart. Canfield Gardens is now Canfield Estates. You can't pull this program because this is the lifeline to those multifamily developments. And so they allowed us to move forward with the program. It was initially a $15 million program. It ended up being a $25 million program because once they demolished them, they saw some of the challenges they had in rebuilding them, so it added millions to it. But they let us do it. And it was because it was intentional. So when I ran for city council, I ran because I saw Boston Housing Authority. I saw what was happening with public housing. I saw how in the McCormick, over in South Boston, they started out with 1,200 units, public housing. They added another 1,000 at a market rate, so there's now 2,400. But at the end of those Section 8, 10 years from now, if the developer, and when is the developer, the difference is Academy Homes, when works for the tenants at Academy Homes, Boston Housing Authority, when now owns Boston House, not Boston, well, they own McCormick, right? Boston Housing Authority kept a land lease, but in 10 years, if Wynn says, look, we want to opt out, and opt out means that they're opting out of the Section 8 program. If Wynn says we want to opt out of Section 8, we want to go market rate, those 1,400 units become market rate. They give those tenant vouchers that they can move. Yes, yeah, it can happen like that. I'm telling you what I've seen beginning to happen. They give the tenants vouchers. The tenants have to move to find some place to live. It can become market rate. So I ran for city council because I think there are things we can do, like we did at Academy Homes. HUD still has what they call a deed of trust under federal development public housing. We still have a deed of trust there. I say take that deed of trust, do like we did at Academy, Canfield, and the other apartment, transfer that deed of trust to the tenants so the tenants then have some ownership interest in public housing. And so when a Wynn says we want to opt out, the tenants will say, well, we've got some ownership interest here. We can't opt out because we have ownership interest in public housing. So that's just some of the things I want to do. I want to do a lot of other creative things, but I don't want to take up the Congresswoman's time.
Oh, so it's not my time. You're welcome at this table, and as I said, we stand to benefit from your expertise, your wisdom, your battle scars, but also your victories, those budgetary and those fiscal and policy victories too, you know, especially at this time. You make me feel a little bit nostalgic about, what used to be possible. Because in this moment, again, our jobs have been largely about mitigating harm, rather than advancement and progress. But we'll get there. And so today's conversation was really focused on, the impacts to these HUD funding cuts and how devastating it will be. And so we were talking specifically about the continual care program, and we'll talk more about that. But hopefully these proposed policy changes will be able to stop, and people won't be devastated by them. But